Good afternoon, everyone. I want to call this hearing of the U.S. Senate Subcommittee on Rural Development and Energy to order. And I want to thank my colleague, Senator Tuberville, Coach Tuberville, and I also want to thank our chair, Senator Stabenow, and our ranking member, Senator Boozman. So it's all great to be here for a very, very important hearing, and we got tremendous witnesses. We want to get to you ASAP. But I do want to give an opening statement on this one-year anniversary of the devastating floods that we experienced in Vermont a year ago, Senator. And Vermonters are still struggling to recover from them. You know, it was a year ago, on July 10th and 11th, that we had the catastrophic flood. And I want to acknowledge, by the way, the first responders, the medical professionals, police and fire and rescue, National Guard, relief agencies, and neighbors who helped everyone in that moment of crisis. And I want to take a moment to acknowledge the Vermonters who lost so much, their homes, their businesses, their farms, their communities. It's a really traumatic experience that lingers, and it's a long-term struggle to get over. And we're going to have more of these in Vermont. We know that. We're going to have more of these in the nation. The weather is changing. We don't have to argue about how, but we can't deny that that is happening. Texas is grappling with devastating effects of the hurricane. It doesn't matter what kind of disaster it is or what state you're in, Hawaii, Texas, Mississippi, or Alabama. It's devastating to our towns. And those of us who represent rural communities where there are no resources in place to address the long-term needs of their community, get back on their feet, are especially vulnerable. You know, in Johnson, Vermont, the flooding destroyed the town's wastewater facility with floodwaters 6 feet high in the building. And that facility is operating now, but at a higher energy and labor cost, and it's kind of rickety. In Montpelier, the state's capital, floodwaters destroyed the federal building, shut down our post office, and a number of our federal or state buildings won't be back online probably until 2025. And we're still waiting for the post office to open to be fully operational. So Vermont, in our capital, we actually don't have a post office that's fully functional. And just 2 weeks ago, severe storms and deadly flooding hit Minnesota. And as someone who's been through what Minnesota is experiencing, I'm delighted that Commissioner Pap is here. Senator Klobuchar and Senator Smith have been informing us about everything that's going on there, and we want to be helpful in any way we can. And if there's one thing that these disasters have made clear, it's that we need to put resilience in the capacity of local communities and states to essentially build back better so that when the next storm comes, there's going to be a lot less damage, or maybe no damage at all if we do it right. We learned that in Vermont in 2011 when we had Tropical Storm Irene. It was the largest and most devastating storm that we had for about 80 years. And we got into the big fight. Do you replace an 8-inch culvert when you need a 16-inch culvert? And FEMA at that time wouldn't let us build back better. But we've been able to change that, and we have to do more of that, not just in Vermont, but in every community, in Mississippi and in Vermont. So responding by incorporating resilience is just a practical and necessary step that we have to take. Last year, even though Brattleboro got 4 inches of rain, the town saw much less damage than it had in Irene, and that was because they had done some resilience work. Another thing is that our small communities can't do it on their own. I'm sure this is true in Mississippi. We got local volunteers. They're on the select board. They're also like part of the road crew, or they're the disaster response coordinator. And this is in towns, you know, of 1,500 or 3,000 people. And they don't have any resources in place to be able to navigate the complexities of the federal government. And one of the big things we're going to talk about today is how do we address that so those communities have the technical resources they need from a local area that is going to allow them to get what they're entitled to and what they need. So that's a critical part of ensuring that disaster recovery will work and work effectively. In the U.S., Rural Development has been a great partner for us, and we're going to hear from Vermont about how we can coordinate and leverage both the local leadership and the work of the USDA. I want to express my gratitude to Chairwoman Stabenow, who understands the importance of rural development programs and has included the largest mandatory funding ever proposed in Farm Bill history in the Rural Prosperity and Food Security Act. Good for her. It marks the first time that a farm proposal has included permanent funding for the rural development title. Chairman Stabenow's Rural Prosperity and Food Security Act also includes new funding to invest in rural capacity building. We need that. So we need to make sure that the federal programs are spending money to help disaster victims, but not on administrative costs as much, but more on actual relief. And we had a situation in Vermont where there was 2 times the amount spent on administration than there was on relief. And obviously, we want to turn that upside down, and that's where the local engagement is so essential. We need to act now. Thank you to the members in attendance today, and to the witnesses for making the trip. I look forward to a very productive bipartisan hearing. And I'll now turn to Coach Tuberville for any opening comments he would like to make. Thank you, Coach.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having this. This is well needed, and thanks to the witnesses for being here. It's going to be very informal. Obviously, we don't have a lot of senators here. There's a vote going on. They will be here soon. Actually, both of us have to go vote. We'll be in and out. But thanks to all the witnesses. Today's discussion on a very important issue for my constituents in Alabama, and we're on the Gulf, and we're obviously in the tornado flyaway, as we call it, down south, and we live in a very vulnerable area of need a lot of times. The state rural infrastructure during national disasters a lot of times is lacking, and we all know that. I still have farmers that are still struggling from a hurricane that we had 5-6 years ago that have not gotten the need that they're supposed to have. So communities never expect to have this happen to them. When a tornado, hurricane, or flood unexpectedly strikes, they quickly have to figure out what to do and how to rebuild, usually on their own, a little bit from the county, city, state. Usually the last one to show up is federal, and that needs to change. So this is a topic all my colleagues should be able to agree on, because this is it's not partisan. Access to affordable electric, water, and wastewater infrastructure is essential for survival in any place in the country now, because there seems to be more and more, whether it's fires, whether it's floods, whether it's tornadoes. Of course, we all know we have hurricanes. Disaster resiliency, community safety, and rapid recovery are critical to all Americans impacted by natural disasters, but this is especially in the rural areas. Rural areas are usually the last one to get any relief. Just this week, Hurricane Beryl has wreaked havoc across Texas and brought high winds, torrential rain to Arkansas, Missouri, and the Midwest. Alabama, my state, is all too familiar with natural disasters due to its proximity to the Gulf of Mexico, making the state more prone to tropical storms, hurricanes, and extreme weather. Over the past few years, Alabama has suffered through its fair share of natural disasters such as Hurricane Michael, Ivan, Sally, and numerous tornadoes. Storms like these highlight the significant need to prioritize investments in rebuilding and hardening critical infrastructure that provide water, electricity, especially in the rural communities. Our rural communities often struggle. They often struggle to compete for federal grants to help recovery efforts from natural disasters due to lack of full-time grant writers, attorneys, and experts who are able to identify available relief resources. Unfortunately, they are oftentimes ill-equipped to navigate the maze of bureaucracy and complex application process. On top of that, I routinely hear about workforce challenges in my state of Alabama and across the nation. Our rural areas really struggle to recruit and maintain qualified and technical assistant experts, certified operators, and technicians, placing them at a competitive disadvantage compared to their urban counterparts. Many certified water and electrical operators across the country are aging towards retirement without enough qualified applicants to backfill their positions. So considering the numerous challenges already faced in rural areas, the last thing we need is more burdensome government red tape, which seems to be more and more every year. As policymakers, we need to ensure applying entities shouldn't have to wait an average of 7 years to navigate the federal permitting process, jumping through various environmental and climate hoops. States and local entities must have the flexibility to implement funding as they see fit. Just as each community is unique, so are natural disasters, which is why states and local entities must have the flexibility to implement funding as they see fit. One-size-fits-all approach doesn't work. We found that out. What works in one town or state may not work in another. We need to get the government out of the way and reduce regulations to make it easier for our rural communities to stand on their own. So I look forward to today's witnesses and hearing their experiences and trying to find some solutions for the future for people that live in rural areas. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I understand that Chairwoman Stabenow and Ranking Member Bozeman will not be giving opening statements, so we'll now move to introduce the witnesses. Ted Brady is the Executive Director of the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. He served here for many years for the senator who is looking at us right now, from his picture on the wall to maybe his C-SPAN view in Burlington, Vermont, and that, of course, is our wonderful friend and your former colleague, Senator Leahy. Mr. Brady served as the Vermont New Hampshire State Director of USDA Rural Development. As I mentioned, a decade working for Senator Leahy. Welcome. And Julie Moore serves as the Vermont Natural Resources Secretary in the Scott administration. She's worked to shape Vermont's environmental agenda, focusing on greenhouse gas mitigation and climate resilience, water quality, the forest economy, and the importance of conservation. She's a highly respected leader in Vermont, and we're delighted to have you. Senator Klobuchar wanted to be here, but as Senator Tuberville mentioned, she can't be with the vote. Oh, she's on her way. Somehow she manages to get to the 3 different places she's supposed to be at once. So it's another Klobuchar miracle. So I'm going to wait so that she can introduce her wonderful Minnesotan. So I'm going to recognize you, Senator, because I understand you've got some reputable people here from your home state.
I wouldn't go that far, reputable, but thank you. And we do have 2 good witnesses here from my state of Alabama. Mr. Mark Bolan, proud to introduce, from Foley, Alabama, who serves as the general manager of the Perdido Bay Water, Sewer, and Fire Protection District in Baldwin County. Mr. Bolan has served as general manager for the district for over 25 years. He is a grade 4 water operator with the state of Alabama and a state certified electrician. In addition, Mark has served on the Alabama Rural Water Board of Directors since 2009 and is currently the association's president. Prior to joining the Perdido Bay District, he served in several different technician, electrician, and operator roles across the country, including the United States Air Force. Thank you for your service. Thanks for being here today, Mark. Thank you.
I'm just going to inquire, we could have the one witness start, and then Senator Klobuchar could introduce.
Keep going.
All right.
Okay.
So, go ahead. Yeah.
Our next distinguished guest, Mr. Brad Kimbro, our next witness from the Wiregrass in Ashford, Alabama. He is the general manager and CEO of Wiregrass Electric Cooperative. Mr. Kimbro has 3 decades of experience. I know you don't look that old, but 3 decades in the electric cooperative industry, and has been with the Wiregrass Electric Co-op since 2006. Within the co-op, he has served as Director of Member of Services Chief Operating Officer prior to assuming the general manager position. He is actively involved with the Alabama Rural Electric Cooperative Association and the National Association, NRECA, and with numerous volunteer roles around the Wiregrass in southeast Alabama. So, Brad, thanks for being here today.
Okay. We'll just wait. Yeah, we'll wait. All right, Senator Klobuchar is in the building.
You don't want
And
these
almost
guys to
here.
give a statement, or?
Well, she's literally coming in.
Oh, she is?
I think so.
Thanks for filibustering.
Well,
All right.
it's wonderful to have Senator Klobuchar join us, and she is going to take a minute, but then is going to be, you always are, and I'll let you introduce your witness. Thank you
Okay,
very
well,
much,
thank
Senator.
you to the chair and ranking member for this important hearing, and I am so honored to introduce my friend Kevin Pap, because we like a lot of drama, you know, and he is chair of the Blue Earth County Board of Commissioners. If any of you saw that dam on national TV, the Rapidan Dam, that is in his county, in his district, and he's been on the front line making sure we're going to either get that repaired, get it replaced, kind of looks like to me. And it's just one example of the work and the challenges that we have. He, as a county commissioner, a farmer, and a lifelong Minnesotan, he's used his skill in building partnerships to help solve difficult problems. He was first elected to his post in 2020, and he's been able to use his experience as a farmer and the former president of the Minnesota Farm Bureau, which he ran for 16 years, to really make the case on the local level about what we need to do to move ahead in rural America. He's a fourth-generation farmer. I have been to his farm and with his neighbors, and with my favorite memory is one of his neighbors who had watched Meet the Press for 3 weeks because I was coming over. So he felt that would prepare him for having a hamburger with me. And he enjoys time with his family, his wife, Julie, of 40 years, 2 grown sons and 2 grandsons. So we welcome Kevin Pap to the committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. I'll now turn to Mr. Brady. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chairman Welch and Ranking Member Tuberville, and members of the committee for having me here today. And for more importantly, for bringing attention to and helping rural communities prepare for, respond to, and be more resilient to future natural disasters. I'm the executive director of the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, which is a municipal association that every one of your states has in it. We exist to serve and strengthen local government, to help them solve problems. As Vermont's own Calvin Coolidge said, local self-government is one of our most precious possessions. It is the greatest contributing factor to the stability, strength, liberty, and progress of the nation. I urge federal lawmakers to consider partnering with us in a federal, state, and local partnership to try to solve this nation's most vexing problems. Today, I'm asking you specifically and asking Congress to consider improving the way that it helps local governments invest in infrastructure, both physical and civic infrastructure, and specifically as it relates to natural disasters. The need for this capacity improvement escalated quickly 1 year ago today when we received as much as 9 inches of rain, a full season's worth of rain in one day, which in Vermont, we have these things called mountains that don't let the rain settle. It all comes rushing down into our valleys. The result was more than $200 million of FEMA public assistance eligible damage to municipal infrastructure, from roads to bridges to wastewater systems to town halls. And like in Minnesota, our stress on dams as well. We have firsthand experience assessing those damages. We're an insurer. We provided $10 million of payouts to municipalities as a result of that. And we see a huge problem as these events occur more and more often. About 15% of all the infrastructure we insure at VLCT, about $500 million sits in FEMA high hazard flood zones, which will only grow as new FEMA maps come about. Hundreds of mayors, select board members, and others contacted us starting the moment the flooding started. At first, they asked us for help accessing mutual aid from neighboring towns, called us for help looking for how to reach the Emergency Operations Center. In the days following the flood, we became a central clearinghouse. Since then, we've answered hundreds of questions about FEMA public assistance eligibility, with a lot of questions about what kind of procurement policy you need to qualify for FEMA. And perhaps more disturbingly, how much do we have to pay a consultant to do this FEMA work for us because we can't handle it ourselves? While our regional planning commissions, our emergency management office are the primary players, VLCT has had to step in to help with capacity. The state of Vermont, USDA Rural Development, along with others, have held disaster preparedness calls weekly and disaster recovery calls weekly. And in these calls, we found that the fundamental thing that we need to do differently is that municipalities need to have a better grasp on municipal finance, operations, and management practices before the storm. You may know this, that wonderful thing called USDA Rural Development that you have jurisdiction over is one of the only federal programs that provides capacity to rural communities. Through its Rural Community Development Initiative, it provides technical assistance funding to spur community and economic development in rural places. All 20,000 cities, towns, and villages in Vermont, as well as tens of thousands of nonprofits, compete for a whopping $5 million in that program this year. Fortunately, in Vermont, our USDA Rural Development Office was there for us after the disaster. They're not a primary response agency, but they're a support agency. And they identified $1 million in the RD Disaster Assistance Fund that helped us enter into a cooperative agreement where we're supporting municipalities with direct one-on-one technical assistance in times of need and to help them apply for federal resources. This is flexible funding. There's an old saying in community and economic development, rural development, once you've seen one rural community, you've seen one rural community. And I don't think that can be better explained than the fact that Commissioner Pap and I are sharing this table. We don't have county government in Vermont. They have a very functioning county government in Minnesota. This difference is sometimes not articulated well in the policies that come out of Washington because it is so different, and that one-size-fits-all thing threatens effective disaster preparedness and recovery. This cooperative agreement has a long list of things in it that we're doing at RD. I'm happy to answer those questions. I've also submitted what we're doing in my full written testimony. Rural municipalities know how to work with RD. RD has staff in our communities. They build trusting relationships, and using those relationships to prepare and respond to a disaster are really important. I have to put a plug in. Our RD office is down 30% in staff. So on behalf of every city, town, and village leader in Vermont, thank you for taking the time to consider how to make these programs work better for us to prepare for and respond to disasters.
Thank you, Mr. Brady.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Chairman Welch, Ranking Member Tuberville, and members of the subcommittee. I'm Julie Moore, the Secretary of Natural Resources for Vermont, and have served in this capacity for about 8 years now. By training, I'm a civil engineer and a registered professional engineer in Vermont, and I mention that because I'm going to talk a lot about water and wastewater infrastructure. I appreciate the opportunity to offer my perspective on these critical infrastructure needs facing Vermont's rural communities, which are being driven by concurrent challenges of aging systems, a shrinking user base, and the impacts of a changing climate. Today's hearing is particularly timely, as you alluded to, Chairman Welch, in that 1 year ago today, Vermont watched a storm system drop as much as 9 inches of rain across the state, which caused massive flooding, hundreds of millions of dollars in damages, and impacted literally thousands of homes and businesses, damaged municipal and state infrastructure, caused landslides, and compromised dams. And while that widespread damage from the July 2023 storms attracted significant national attention, the fact of the matter is, since 2010, Vermont has had 22 flood-related federal disaster declarations, nearly 2 per year, and up from an average of 1 every other year throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Clearly, more frequent and more severe storms are our new normal, including today, with Vermont forecast calling for multiple inches of rain as the remnants of Hurricane Beryl pass over the Green Mountains. And so I see the key to building resilience as consistent investment in municipal water infrastructure. And let me tell you why. But first, I think it's important to frame the issue and some of the challenges we're facing. Small rural states like Vermont are challenged to fund essential investments in water infrastructure without our federal partners, especially in and immediately following natural disasters. For perspective, Vermont has 417 community water systems serving just about half our state's population, 300,000 Vermonters. But almost 75% of those 417 systems serve a population of less than 500 people. Most have volunteer boards with volunteer part-time operators. And during the July 23 storms, 18 systems serving about 40,000 Vermonters sustained significant impacts to their drinking water infrastructure or operation that required boil water notices or do not drink notices. The story was even more challenging on the wastewater side. Vermont has 92 municipal wastewater facilities that serve mainly small rural communities. About 2/3 are permitted to treat less than 100,000 gallons a day, which I see as an indicator of the small rural population they serve. And more than 1/3 of these facilities, 33 in total, sustained damage during last July's floods, totaling more than $75 million. 3 facilities, including the one you mentioned, Chair Welch, in Johnson, will require extensive rebuilding and possibly even relocation. But unfortunately, most of these small utilities do not have capital available within their annual budget to make these kind of significant unanticipated repairs. While ultimately a significant share of the cost of the infrastructure repairs following a natural disaster is covered by insurance and FEMA reimbursement, there is an upfront cost to this work which can be substantial, and immediate cash flow is critical, helping ensure communities make decisions around recovery and reinvestment based on what will serve them best in the long term, as opposed to being limited by what they can afford in the immediate. And I saw this firsthand in the weeks following last July's floods. In speaking with leaders in some of the most flood-ravaged communities, it was clear that they were leveraged to the hilt and had exhausted market rate private capital available to them to make emergency repairs and restore services, limiting the resources needed to plan for how they can build back smarter. In response, I convened a funder summit involving my staff responsible for administering Vermont's state revolving fund programs, the Vermont Municipal Bond Bank, the State Treasurer's Office, and USDA Rural Development. Over a period of weeks, we cobbled together a complicated and tenuous funding stack to meet the same need that would be better addressed, I believe, through the Rural Recovery Act and the enhancements it would make to the Disaster Assistance Fund. I can't overstate the importance of having available, flexible, low-cost or no-cost money that can be deployed quickly following a disaster. There simply isn't time to wait for Congress to designate and appropriate additional disaster-related funds to support the work that needs to happen on the ground in those moments of need. Ideally, a robust disaster assistance fund would include budget authority to provide flexibility around RD's water and environmental programs immediately following a disaster. Changes would also be helpful to increase RD's authority to issue waivers, to expedite funding to meet real-time needs and streamline procedures that can be extremely difficult for smaller communities. In closing, one of the most important collaborative relationships my agency has in the drinking water and wastewater space is with USDA Rural Development. Rural Development supports cost-effective investments in community infrastructure and partners with us on long-term disaster recovery. The Rural Recovery Act would establish and expand this essential partnership, helping ensure that immediate financial challenges following a disaster don't perpetuate vulnerabilities and increase long-term costs, but instead support our rural communities in developing and implementing considered and durable solutions in the wake of natural disasters. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much, and I recognize Mr. Pap, and I'm going to have to go vote, and I'm going to ask Senator Smith if she'd chair in my absence. Thank you.
Chairman Welch, Ranking Member Tuberville, members of the subcommittee, thank you for holding today's hearing. My name is Kevin Pap. I'm representing the National Association of Counties. As a Blue Earth County Commissioner, fourth-generation farmer, emergency medical services instructor, past volunteer firefighter, and Minnesota Farm Bureau president, I have witnessed firsthand the impacts of natural disasters on rural communities. As a farmer, whether it's a fence or a farm building, I think about 4 corner posts. Please consider these 4 corner posts in the county's role in disaster planning, response, and recovery, and how federal policy can build resiliency to national disasters in rural America. The first corner post: natural disasters have become more frequent, more severe, and more costly. Last year, 849 counties experienced at least one federally declared major disaster. Minnesota has not been immune to these trends. We have been impacted by 7 separate billion-dollar disasters in 2023. Corner post number 2. County governments are on the front line of disaster response and recovery. County governments are responsible for local emergency response, with county elected officials and emergency managers leading these efforts. We also support the operation of hospitals, maintenance of public roads and bridges, and invest significant funds in building public infrastructure and maintaining and operating public works. To protect our investments, county must develop preventive plans to mitigate risk and determine how to respond when a disaster unfolds. Water and wastewater infrastructure are critically important and particularly vulnerable during natural disasters. During the recent flooding in Blue Earth County, our county-owned Rapidan Dam infrastructure failed, causing significant damage to public and private property along the Blue Earth River. Thousands of aging rural infrastructure projects like our Rapidan Dam pose a threat to communities in future disasters without adequate support. Corner post number 3. Natural disasters not only disrupt the lives and livelihoods of our residents, but also put heavy burdens on rural counties. Rural counties are often hindered in our ability to manage emergency response and recovery efforts due to limited personnel and limited funding. These capacity challenges can lead to prolonged disruptions to infrastructure and services, as well as extended recovery periods and economic loss for residents. Addressing these issues by building rural capacity through technical assistance or direct funding can help protect residents and promote long-term prosperity. Existing USDA rural development programs, such as the Community Facilities Program and the Emergency Water Assistance Grants Program, are important for supporting rural communities during and after natural disasters. While these programs can be a lifeline for rural areas hit by disaster, consistent funding shortages at rural development mean that these programs may not be able to help as many communities as needed. Corner post number 4. The Farm Bill provides a unique opportunity to improve rural disaster resilience. NACO urges the following provisions be included in the 2024 Farm Bill to bolster rural capacity building. The Rural Partnerships Program, which would provide flexible grants to rural communities to help them respond to a wide variety of urgent needs, including disaster preparedness. By improving the capacity of rural communities, the program can make sure rural counties are better equipped to protect residents from natural disasters. Permanent authorization for the Rural Partners Network. This USDA-led initiative places federal employees in rural communities to improve collaboration with our federal partners and help the local governments navigate federal funding opportunities. Although it's a small program, it has managed to turn its $11.5 million budget into over $3 billion in federal investments in participating rural communities since its creation in 2022. Passage of the Streamlining Federal Grants Act. This bill would make it easier for local governments, including rural communities, to access federal resources and grant opportunities by simplifying the federal grant administration process. Chairman Welch and Ranking Member Tuberville, thank you for inviting me to share Blue Earth County's story. Counties look forward to working with you to build a stronger, more resilient rural America. I appreciate the opportunity to testify and look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Pap, and we will now hear from Mr. Bolan for 5 minutes.
Welch, Ranking Member Tuberville, and members of the committee. I am deeply honored to be here today. I would like to extend my personal gratitude to Senator Tuberville for his invitation and stalwart leadership for Alabama's rural water and wastewater sector. I am the general manager of the Perdido Bay Water, Sewer, and Fire Protection District and serve as the president of the Alabama Rural Water Association, where I represent Baldwin, Mobile, and Washington counties, serving a population of over 630,000 Alabamians. Perdido Bay is a nonprofit organization that was incorporated in 1973 to deliver drinking water to the communities of Lillian and Perdido Beach. We started with 600 customers with direct assistance from the Farmers Home Administration, the precursor of rural development. Fast forward almost 50 years, and Perdido Bay continues to take advantage of the affordable low interest rates provided through rural development. If I may, I'd like to express my gratitude to this committee for its unwavering commitment to the success of these initiatives. There is a sentiment that billions from the American Rescue Plan Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act will meet industry needs, but much of this funding benefits larger systems. The Alabama Department of Environmental Management has done a great work supporting rural communities. However, this positive trend in Alabama isn't seen nationwide. Predominantly rural states like Alabama benefit from a political landscape that directs more funds to rural areas. It is critical to emphasize that these additional funds are not permanent, and small and rural communities heavily depend on rural development to maintain and enhance their utilities and affordable services. According to the most recent EPA drinking water survey, a 20-year capital improvement assessment for both urban and rural communities totaled $625 billion in needs. Currently, we face challenges including PFAS, treatment, cybersecurity upgrades, workforce development, and compliance with federal mandates like the lead and copper rule. Inflation and supply chain issues also heavily impact small water utilities. We urge the committee to ensure USDA's Rural Development Program has the resources needed to help rural communities address these challenges now and into the future. During my 25-year tenure serving as general manager of my utility, I have experienced numerous storms and 2 direct hits by hurricanes, Ivan and Sally. During Hurricane Ivan, we didn't have resources and manpower to adequately respond. For Hurricane Sally, we relied on the direct assistance from ARWA to fill this void. In cooperation with National Rural Water Association and other state rural water associations, Alabama Rural Water Association brought in emergency response trailers, generators, and manpower. They set up a command center at my utility where they coordinated with Alabama's Emergency Management Agency, deploying staff and resources to surrounding water and wastewater systems. Within a week, operations were restored to normal. For decades, NRWA and state rural water associations have served as the leaders in disaster recovery in many states. Unfortunately, there has been no dedicated federal funding to enhance or expand this activity beyond the limited assistance currently provided under the Circuit Rider program. Preventative measures and post-disaster assistance are equally important. Having dedicated on-site and experienced full-time staff will greatly improve services for rural utilities. We are grateful that Congress responded with pending bipartisan legislation in both the House and Senate. The Rural Water Systems Disaster Preparedness and Assistance Act, if enacted, this approach will fund and authorize pre- and post-disaster activities. This includes creating vulnerability assessment, disaster action, and mitigation plans, geographic mapping, and hardening facilities. Post-disaster support will help with applying for federal and state funding and meeting reporting requirements necessary for reimbursement and other needs. After the devastating impact of Hurricane Katrina and Rita, NRWA established a permanent standing emergency response committee. This committee meets regularly to coordinate and review response efforts nationwide. In summary, I firmly believe that with additional federal authorities, effective collaboration, thoughtful planning, and mutual aid, we can address the challenges of emergencies and enhance the response, recovery, and resilience of rural water and wastewater systems nationwide. Our state Rural Water Association stand ready to continue providing these services. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'm ready to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Bolan. And now we will turn to Mr. Kimbro for 5 minutes of testimony. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Welch, Ranking Member Tuberville, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. On behalf of Wiregrass Electric's roughly 18,000 consumer members, we sincerely appreciate the committee's interest in natural disaster and rural infrastructure issues. Wiregrass Electric Cooperative, or WEC for short, is a distribution electric cooperative in its 84th year of operations, providing affordable, reliable electricity to homes, farms, businesses in the Wiregrass region and southern Alabama. As a cooperative, we are member-owned and controlled. The cost of running our electric utility is shouldered by our member owners. Electrification of the Wiregrass region was only possible because the federal government offered low-interest loans beginning in the 1930s. Fast forward to today, WEC continues to borrow money through the Rural Utility Service Electric Loan Program in order to keep the lights on and at a price that families can afford. Roughly 25% of our consumer members struggle to pay their electric bill each month. Low-interest RUS electric loans help us keep costs affordable. Our job is to reliably deliver affordable electricity to our consumer members 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. During thunderstorms, windstorms, floods, hurricanes, and other weather events, we work hard to keep the lights on, and in the event of an outage, our mission is to safely restore service in the most timely fashion. In my 30 years in the electric utility cooperative industry, I have witnessed and managed recovery efforts for over a dozen hurricanes and tropical storms. This includes powerful Category 5 Hurricane Michael that hit our WC service territory in October of 2018. Hurricane Michael resulted in $8 million in additional cost for WEC. We were able to work through our already approved RUS work plan to respond and rebuild after this storm. Unfortunately, not every co-op can continue to work under their co-op's current RUS work plan after these type storm events. To obtain a new RUS electric loan, a co-op is responsible for submitting extensive paperwork and go through lengthy approval processes. For this reason, obtaining a new RUS electric infrastructure loan for rebuilding after these type storms is usually not a viable option. Instead, many electric cooperatives need quick financing after a natural disaster, so they turn to a private lender or draw down an existing line of credit to pay for storm response and infrastructure repair. These loans come with higher interest rates often. While electric cooperatives are eligible for 75% reimbursement under FEMA's Public Assistance Program, our members, after Hurricane Michael, still had to absorb the remaining 25%, or around $2 million. Additionally, recouping the interest accrued on those loans or lines of credit just adds to the financial burden. Thankfully, while our Hurricane Michael public assistance process was relatively smooth, that is not always the case for every cooperative. I'm aware of other electric cooperatives still dealing with reimbursement issues related to Hurricane Michael. The same is true with other storms that have hit the Gulf Coast in the last 5 years. The longer reimbursement takes, the higher the interest expense, which is ultimately passed on to the cooperative's consumer member. Also, it's important to remember that responding to a disaster is not just about physical damage. These storms take an emotional toll. We are a co-op of around 60 employees. Our linemen perform dangerous work during these times when their families' well-being and financial situations are uncertain. This impact is really difficult to measure. In closing, Wiregrass Electric is dedicated to delivering affordable, reliable electric service to Alabama households, businesses, farms, and our communities. Nearly 900 electric cooperatives across the country have similar community-focused missions for the areas they serve. As this committee works on rural infrastructure issues, I look forward to continuing to work with you toward our shared goal of improving life in rural America. I'm happy to answer any questions you all may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for all of your testimony. While the chair is returning from voting, we will begin our round of questioning, and I will start. Oh, good. Here's the chair. I want to thank Senator Welch and also Ranking Member Tuberville for holding this hearing right now. And as Commissioner Pap indicated, in June, Minnesota was hit by very heavy rains. I know these also affected Iowa Senator Ernst. I was talking with Senator Grassley about this as well, the heavy flooding. And Senator Klobuchar and I led a delegation letter to the President asking for major disaster declaration. And I know that the USDA has offered disaster assistance to Minnesota producers. So the federal response to helping Minnesota is at the top of my mind right now in the wake of these floods. And as Commissioner Pap said, the Rapidan Dam, which is in Commissioner Pap's county, was breached during this heavy rainstorm. 11.6 million cubic yards of sediment were released, overtaking house and power infrastructure. It was really quite incredible. And as you know, this was a 100-year-old dam. And in need of repair, major repair, even before the flooding that closed it in 2020. So I think the story and the experience of Blue Earth County is a good story for us to be thinking about as we consider the burden that falls on counties as we are responding to these disasters all over the country. Commissioner Pap, let me just ask you a question about this. Can you just talk a bit more about why it's so important to help rural communities that might not have the staff power, rural communities and rural counties that might not have the staff power to go after federal grants and resources in ways that much larger, better staffed, I would say, urban counties might have? And what does that mean in terms of your resilience when it comes to these disasters?
Oh, Madam Chair, thank you for that question. And you learn a lot after a disaster. Thankfully, we don't have them every day, so we don't become that well versed. But there's many times, especially with smaller communities, smaller counties, local governments, you don't have the capacity, whether it's personnel, whether it's resources, and quite frankly, you don't know what you don't know. And we need that help to do that. And not only is responding, certainly with the Rapidan Dam, our number one goal was the safety and the health of our residents. And that's number one goal of all local governments. But as we get through that and respond and go through the process, we need assistance. And we don't know what we don't know. We've maybe never done this before. Many counties don't have the expertise. They don't know what's available. So I guess I would just ask that we all work together the best we can. You know, as a farmer, you learn as an early age from your dad, or really probably from your grandpa, that working together works. And I would just ask that whether it be the federal, state, or the local governments, we do as good a job as we can to work together. But when a disaster strikes, the rest of the activities in the county don't come to a standstill.
That's right.
We had county employees that went above and beyond, spent days and days on site. There are still other things going on in that county that have to be covered. So certainly a thank you to all our Blue Earth County employees for the great job they did and all over the country. But we really need some assistance because we don't know sometimes what's available, or we don't have the resources to access that technical assistance.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate your comments. And I want to just point out, and then I'm going to wrap up my questions, Mr. Chair. I want to point out that apropos of what you're talking about, the Farm Bill framework and proposal that Chair Stabenow has put out includes the Rural Partnerships Program, which is this public-private partnership to help rural areas apply for and access federal money. I think this is very important. I think this is a strength of the Chair's proposal over the House proposal, and I hope that we can keep that in mind as we think about what we can do to support rural communities as they are seeking federal funds to help them do their jobs. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Senator Tuberville.
I'd like to pass my time to Senator Ernst.
Chair recognizes Senator Ernst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ranking Member. Certainly appreciate it. And I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today as well. And now more than ever, as you've seen, just the disasters across the United States, I can say that your testimonies and, of course, the challenges that have been described are shared among many of my Iowa communities. So, again, thank you so much. Just a couple of weeks ago, as Senator Smith had referenced, we saw a lot of flooding coming through the northwest corner of my state. We saw a heavy rainfall that caused major flooding up and down the Missouri River. Of course, it did impact Minnesota. It impacted North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Iowa. And in a matter of hours, we saw hundreds and hundreds of families that had their homes destroyed. We saw helicopter rescues. We had boat rescues in communities. And we had just so many small businesses that were in total ruin. The roads and bridges completely swept away. Water and electrical systems ceased operations. And of course, Iowa, known for its crops, we had a significant amount of crop damage under feet of flowing water. Large portions of western Iowa saw similar destruction earlier this spring when we had tornadoes. So Iowa seems to have been the epicenter this year for so many different events. We had a number of communities that saw 60% or more of their homes destroyed by tornadoes. Following each of these disasters, I was able to go out and visit with our constituencies, the Iowans, and personally hear their testimonies. And so in previous disasters, having served in the National Guard, had deployed to many of those types of events through the years. And we really are Iowa strong. I certainly saw the best of our communities. So anyway, Mr. Pop, is that correct? Thank you. And thanks for being here. And I know that you've seen so many of these similar situations and a lot of swift response from those local emergency management teams. What I would like to do is just dive in a little bit different. You've mentioned access to resources, understanding where and how to go about getting those resources. Have any of the farmers that you've worked with faced challenges when they do go to the USDA or the Small Business Administration? Maybe walk me through gaining access to some of those larger federal agencies.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ernst, thank you for that. As you look at agencies in agriculture, of our 128-year-old family farm, probably the best relationship is always USDA, because that's the agency that is used the most in agriculture every year through farm programs or whatever it would be. As you broaden out to rural development and then into the other agencies, you don't have that relationship, and many times, quite frankly, you don't have that county FSA office where you know the folks there. Even if you don't know what you don't know, you know who to ask. As we get into disasters and other things and programs, sometimes people just aren't sure who the right person is. So that's why we really feel it's important to get that information out to those ag producers, and not just the farmers and ranchers, but those rural communities that have been affected by that weather. And I think, agriculture, like everything else in life, we can always do better. We want to work on continual improvement, and I think there are many things we can improve on in that coordination, and really the key to coordination is communication, and we can always do better communicating with those rural residents.
Yeah, agreed. And then responsiveness. Once you've found the go-to person, whether it's at the FSA or any other local agency, maybe even in your capital city or responding here in Washington, D.C., the response times, do you find that those federal agencies get back to you in a reasonable amount of time?
Well, serving as in the local ambulance and fire department for 29 years, nobody ever said you got there too soon. What took so long? And I think that's the case as well. But I do think as we look at this process, whether it's applications, whether it's limiting the number of pages that are involved, or if it's response time, how many days, we want to know what that timeline is. We know things can't happen overnight, but when can we or should we expect an answer? And again, I would go back to continual improvement. I believe this process can and should be improved.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Mr. Pop gets quote of the day. Yeah, thank you. Thanks to all of you.
Thank you, Senator Ernst. And I want to recognize our ranking member. Thank you for all the great work you've done on this committee and on the support you've given me and Senator Tuberville on this committee as well.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got to run, but I just want to thank you too for this is really what the Ag Committee is all about. And this hearing is excellent. You all have done a tremendous job. And, we hear all about the ranker up here and the this and that, but, this is just everybody working together trying to figure out a solution to a really significant problem. So thank you for your testimony. It's very, very helpful, very incisive. And I'm going to get out of your way so you can actually get some good things done. But I do want to compliment you too in your leadership and example. I know it's hard with Senator Tuberville. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Senator. And thank you, Senator Ernst. The chair will recognize himself. Mr. Brady, what was the biggest challenge that the rural communities that you work with throughout Vermont face in identifying and applying for federal disaster assistance funds, including the funds from USDA-RD?
Thanks for asking, Mr. Chairman. Simply put, it's capacity. In Vermont, of the 247 cities and towns and another 31 or so villages, less than half, about 40% have professional career staff to help manage the town, which means the person writing the grant application is oftentimes a select board member who works in a garage, works in the farm, you name it, and they're doing it after hours. That means 60% of Vermont does not have professional capacity to deal with these things. So when the federal government stands up a grant program that needs to be applied for, and you need to follow the rules to apply, then administer, and then follow reporting requirements, 60% of the time, it doesn't work every time in Vermont. It's really overwhelming. Quick couple of stories. Marshfield, Vermont, population 1,583. Last July's flooding resulted in $4 million worth of damages. Their budget is $1 million. Their annual budget is $1 million. They do not have a career manager, which meant it was up to the elected town clerk, whose job has nothing to do with disaster management, to manage a disaster. And she called us and said, I need to write an RFP. I need an engineer. I need a consultant. I don't know how to do this. None of my select board members know how to do this. Where do I go for help? Down the road in Cabot, Vermont, the governor yesterday was at a fire station that was destroyed, red tagged by public safety, and after the July flooding. The chairman of that select board came to us and said, how do we afford to hire help? We don't have any money. Who's going to actually do all of this work for us? They have no capacity. The town of Weston, population 566, famous for the Weston Playhouse, a wonderful, bucolic, incredible little town in south central Vermont. They faced the fact that the select board, Jim Linville, called us and said, we're overwhelmed, we're a tiny town, our volunteers are exhausted, we don't have any expertise, who are the consultants we can work with? Jamaica, Vermont, southern Vermont, population 1,030. 2023 floods resulted in $1.6 million in damage. That doesn't sound like a lot. You know what's a lot? That $1.6 million was in 77 different FEMA public worksheets. They have very little professional capacity in Jamaica.
Thank you. Yeah.
Who's going to do those?
Right. Thank you. I want to thank you very much. Those are very vivid, very real, and I've got to take the ranking member to some of those towns. I want to ask Ms. Moore, the last major flooding was during Hurricane Irene, preceding last year. And we did some resilience work in that. And I want you to just describe how those investments in resilience, not just building back the same, but building back better with the threat of another storm, how did those investments help the state's infrastructure withstand flooding last year?
Yeah, I think they were critical. I want to highlight two specific examples of investments Vermont made following Tropical Storm Irene. The first was more generally in enhancing what we refer to as our codes and standards, and that governs the sizing of culverts and bridges as they're replaced around the state of Vermont. We modernized our codes and standards to reflect the kinds of rainfall patterns we're seeing in the 2020s as opposed to what we were seeing in the 1960s, which had been the rainfall data driving much of our design. And as a result, structures that were replaced following Tropical Storm Irene with appropriately sized structures for our current climate, only one was lost during the 2023 floods. The overall damage to our road and bridge infrastructure was significantly lower than it was. Some of that's a reflection of the type of storm we saw last July, but I think a lot of that is a reflection of changes we've made in how we size our infrastructure. The other one I would point to is our Waterbury State Office Complex. This is a building that houses over 1,000 state employees and was closed for literally 6 years following Tropical Storm Irene, when the Winooski River flooded the complex and frankly filled the basement of that building with water. We rebuilt, filling the basement with flowable fill, elevating all of the building's utilities. The Winooski River flooded again last July, but the damage was really limited to the parking lots, and that facility was reopened within 2 weeks' time. And it's just such a night and day difference how strategic investments in hardening as well as resiliency can help us withstand a wider range of weather events.
That's very helpful. And based on your experience, do you have some suggestions on what steps Congress can take to ensure that USDA RD resources help communities rebuild in the wake of disasters?
Yeah, I think, as I alluded to in my remarks, that immediate cash flow is really important. It's very hard to go to the communities that Ted just described with his examples in the throes of a disaster and suggest what they really need to do is a planning study or an engineering assessment. RD has the capacity, the technical know-how and capacity to support communities in thinking through what the best long-term decisions are, as well as the ability to bring contracted resources to bear that oftentimes these communities don't know where to start. And so it's a partnership, but just knowing where to turn with those important questions, being able to not just react in the moment, but think for the long term. And having partners that stand ready and available to provide that kind of support in the moment is really essential.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. I recognize Senator Tuberville.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bolan, workforce is going to play a large role in the next few years, decades, especially in our rural areas. And my understanding is you have an apprenticeship program in your water area. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Thank you for the question, Senator. As you mentioned, we are members of a apprenticeship program that's provided through Alabama Rural Water that they have put together with the Labor Department. First off, I'd like to say you were talking about the aging workforce. I'm one of them. I'm getting to an age where I'm looking at retirement. Our system currently right now has 6 certified operators. Of those 6 certified operators, four of us are at retirement age or quickly approaching. In fact, I've got one operator that's retiring this month. So it is imperative that we can get younger people involved, hired in the system, and get them trained, provide the proper training. We've found out by partnering with Alabama Rural Water Association and the apprenticeship program that they can provide an avenue that we can get our employees classroom time to get the education that they need in order to pass certification, state certification, so that they can become licensed operators. It's also hands-on, work under a mentor type program. And I'm proud to say that right now we've got one employee that is in the apprenticeship program. He is fixing to finish it. He's already acquired his Alabama State certification, and we've got another employee we're fixing to put in there. And I'd also like to mention that the employee that we have in the apprenticeship program right now that's finishing up will be the first graduate in the state of Alabama in the apprenticeship program. So I feel that it's very important, Senator, that we look out for young people and try to bring them into the field and get them involved, and that we have ways to get them educated and also give them the tools that they need so that they can go out and make the taps, put in the services. And
Do you have any recommendations for the Farm Bill that we're putting together for workforce development?
Yes, sir. If we can get these, as you know, the apprenticeship program was started with rural development funds back in 2018. Coming forward, anything that we can get in to help with the technical assistance and training that is in the Farm Bill, if we can get any help, any more help in there, I honestly believe that that would be a great benefit to us.
Mr. Kimbro, y'all, do you have any workforce development in your area?
Yes, sir, Senator, we do. We work with our local and regional state to do that. Yes, sir, sure do. And very successful at it. Of course, you know, the success of businesses moving in is to have the people to employ, and that's very critical.
You know, most people don't know where your region is in the part of Alabama. You're not actually on the Gulf, but you do see quite a bit of devastation from tornadoes to hurricanes, as we saw a few years ago.
Right.
And you have huge problems with electric and water anytime we have this devastation. Speak to the importance of being able to utilize all energy sources like natural gas. Tell me about your experiences with that.
Yes, sir. Well, as CEO of Wiregrass Electric Cooperative, I'm concerned about reliability and affordability. They're both important. We would like to see an all approach where one size doesn't fit all. We certainly depend on a lot of generation resources, and we need that capacity. Certainly after these storms, we need to have the reliability is very, very critical, and having access to that affordability and reliability is critically important as we move forward in this country.
Yeah, I'd like to ask all of you this question, if you want to add in on this. What problems do you see with smaller water systems as compared to the larger water systems? Mr. Bolan, we'll start with you in terms of getting funding. How do we fight that problem for rural areas?
Thank you for the question, Senator. Going through the RD apply process can be very tedious and cumbersome. I've done it myself before, and it takes time. You have to provide engineering reports, as a lot of these other people have testified today. You have to fill out all their paperwork, get budgets together. They want 5-year capital improvement budgets, and they want, you know, your audited reports. So there's a lot that goes into it. And fortunately, we've got enough people at our system that I could do it myself and work through the process along with our engineering firm. But there's so many water systems throughout the state of Alabama that don't have the people and the resources to do that themselves. And there does need to be a vehicle where they can assist these smaller systems. And that's one of the things that Alabama Rural Water does supply. They have people and they have the resources. They can go out and they can call on these smaller systems if they have a need. If they reach out and they say, hey, we want to apply for some rural development funds, that they've got the people that can assist them and get these applications filled out and turned in.
Mr. Kimbro?
Yes, sir, Senator. Infrastructure is so important. Water, sewer, electricity, broadband, everything for our community. And in rural America, which I represent, if you don't have those things, then people aren't coming, businesses aren't coming, they're not providing jobs and not providing hope for quality of life for our rural America. So it's majorly important. And I would just say that the programs that are in place, like the Rural Utility Services Program, RUS, FEMA after natural disasters, those are really helpful programs that really helps rural America not be left behind, and that's majorly important.
Yeah, one more question, if I could. We won't. Good. I want everybody to answer this one. man-made disasters, cyber attacks. Who wants to start? Have you had any problems with it? How did you overcome it? And what do you see down the road to be able to stop it? Have at it. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. Thank you for bringing up that subject. At our water system 10 years ago, we ended up getting, I don't know, we think it came through email, but we ended up getting ransomware. They locked all of our files up. We couldn't access any of our customer files. We couldn't get into any of our company files. Fortunately, this happened on a weekend, on a Friday, and it was a long weekend. I believe it was Labor Day weekend. And we were able to call we have an IT team that works with us. We were able to call them in. They were able to come in and take all of our servers offline. They stripped the hard drives, got everything off of it, then reinstalled the software, then put the data and everything back in from backups to get us back up and running. But it is a real threat. I'm afraid that it's growing right now. And there's a lot of things that need to be done, and I think that, you know, training and technical assistance in that area is greatly needed. But it's scary when you're in a situation like that. You know, fortunately, I can say that none of our customers' information was compromised, or none of our company's information was compromised. But it's scary because you don't know what's going to happen. And the funny thing about it, when we were hacked and they got into our files, they never sent anything wanting a ransom. They just tied everything up. So, but that's our experience.
Anybody else?
Yes, sir, Senator. We were actually had a cyber attack hit our system in July 3rd of 21, and we were down 4 days, mostly out of precaution, just going through things and making sure we didn't bring it back up, and you know, before we knew we were safe. But it's a real concern. We spent a lot of resources, human resources, dollars, of course. The bad guys get smarter, it seems, every day, and what worked today, you know, they figured out, so you're constantly chasing that. It's a very big concern, and in some cases it locks us down to where it's not as friendly to do business with us as we would like. You know, like speaking credit card information over the phone, you can't do, you know, because you're not PCI compliant in those regards. And our, you know, members, we want to make sure their information is protected. Certainly their financial information, credit card information, and so on, so forth. It's a major concern. We spend a lot of resources looking at it, and literally hope and pray every day that nothing bad happens.
Any other experiences? Go ahead.
From a NACO perspective, it doesn't matter which one of the 3,069 counties, parishes, or boroughs we represent, I think we have to recognize with cybersecurity, it's not a fair fight. You know, the bad guys only have to be right once to win. We have to be right every day, every hour to win. And there's many of those local governments that don't have the resources, don't have the capacity to make sure that they're state-of-the-art, that continual improvement on cybersecurity. It's something that I think it's only going to get worse, and it's something we've got to recognize.
I would just offer, we've been digging into this in Vermont as well. Frankly, one of the saving graces, if it can be considered that we've discovered is many of our smallest water systems aren't actually connected to the outside world, and that is their best form of prevention. I don't know that that's long-term sustainable, and certainly comes with other costs. And we're starting from square one oftentimes for locales that are connected to the internet with some sort of remote access. Oftentimes folks haven't even set passwords. So thinking, you know, to the minds of the bad guys and who are constantly advancing, and we're still at the stage where many of these systems have the default passwords remaining in there as the access point. Is a challenging set of circumstances. So there's an enormous need for education, understanding, building that awareness. Vermont is challenged by the fact that we don't have county government, as Ted has spoken to, 250 plus municipal entities, 400 plus public water systems. And so figuring out how to deliver those services in partnership with Vermont Rural Water is the direction we're headed.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking. As the insurer for most of the state's water and sewer systems, I can simply point to how hard it is to insure these things. And they're really uncovered. When these things do happen, oftentimes it is the town itself that needs to shoulder the burden, the system itself that needs to shoulder the burden, because that market's so hard, because it is such a risk.
So you can't buy insurance for this?
In Vermont, you get a very minimal amount of coverage, not enough to restore the system in the worst case scenario.
Interesting.
If it's okay, I just want to ask one question to the panel. And this is based on my observations of what happened to Vermont in Irene and then the year ago. But what I noticed, and this might be true in your communities as well, FEMA was really great right after the event. They showed up. They were responsive. They provided food, some temporary shelter, immediate cash. And that was combined with the extraordinary first responder response and neighbors in the community who all came out to help the folks whose home was flooded or business was underwater. Then they leave. And they leave because they have another disaster, fire in Hawaii, Houston, and they got to keep going. And in the aftermath, Vermont gets back on its feet. But if it's your home, if it's your farm, if it's your business, it's really tough. It's tough emotionally, but it's also really tough because then the folks who are coming to represent FEMA are not institutionally there. There's a lot of bureaucratic things, and this is where Coach Tuberville, I really agreed with the opening the comments you made about the complexity of it. And my view is that FEMA is just not set up for that long-term follow-through situation. They have a principal job of that immediate disaster response. And what I've seen in Vermont is that those local folks on the select board are totally engaged with their community on how do we fix this bridge. They're totally engaged with the fact that the grocery store in the small town needs to be reopened to help folks there. So my view is that, and RD has been fantastic. The USDA has been that institution that's been the closest to the people. But my view, and I want your reaction to this, is that we've got to redesign so that we drive down the resources to that local community where there is local people who are totally committed to the reconstruction as quickly, as efficiently, and as affordably as possible. So it suggests to me, listening to Senator Tuberville, that this may be an area where we could provide some reform with the goal of empowering those local communities where we've got the citizens who are invested in the follow-through and will answer the tough questions. Maybe just go down the line to get your reaction to that sort of outline of a revised approach.
Thank you for asking, Senator. What we find is FEMA's long-term recovery approach really does put the recovery in the hands of local long-term recovery volunteers. And it's imperfect at best. To what you said before, projects don't get done in days or weeks or months when FEMA's there. Projects get done in years. Give you an example, Londonderry, Vermont, got a down in south central Vermont, got a FEMA mitigation grant post-Irene. 2 weeks, 3 weeks before the July 23 flooding, they finished that project. More than 10 years after the disaster, it was to raise a single residence house up out of the flood zone. Like, that system doesn't seem to be working well. Killington, Vermont, paid off its last piece of disaster debt the week before, from Irene, which was 2011, the week before the 23 flooding. That system doesn't seem to be working. So we'd embrace it. I think the Rural Recovery Act that you've proposed would be an incredible opportunity for changing the way we do disaster response and have RD more involved. And I think the Rural Partnerships Program that Commissioner Pap mentioned is also important for getting ready ahead of time for disasters.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I would echo actually some of the comments Ted made in his opening remarks about the importance of the financial, operational, and managerial capacity in many of our small rural communities. And I think that's where part of this disconnect is that FEMA has a lot of opportunities, but they tend to be complex and application intensive. And we have a lot of passion and commitment on the part of the volunteers and town clerks who would go after those resources. But what's needed in between is some technical assistance and expertise. And to my mind, that's where I see the Rural Recovery Act coming in. USDA-RD has the ability to sort of work between with a foot in each of those worlds and help connect sort of that vision that the community holds to how you actually build that project on the ground. And that's a gap right now.
Any others, Mr. Pap?
Well, I would just add that, sitting in this room in the Ag Committee and Agriculture, we've got a lot of commodities that we raise in this country, but the most precious commodity we all have is time. And whether it's disaster, during the disaster or the recovery process, time is critical. So anything we can do to help with that process, to help with that coordination, I think would be important.
Great, thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question. As far as FEMA goes, when Ivan came through, they were great. They were there with boots on the ground. They had appraisers coming out, checking out properties, and trying to help get money and aid into the community. They gave us spreadsheets where we had to keep our forced work time sheets of employees and what they worked, and they also provided funds to pay for equipment such as chainsaws and generators that we might need during the event to get us up and going. When Sally hit, I called our local EMA and told them that we had some issues and needed to talk to FEMA. I never saw anybody. Once the crisis was over, they came back and they funneled some money into Baldwin County, because what they're doing is they take money and they'll give a section or a county, an area, they'll give them a lot of money. And then what we have is we have stakeholders. And us as a water system in Baldwin County, we're a stakeholder in this group. All right, if we want to get money to do something, and all of this money is hazard mitigation, it's not to repair or fix anything that's been damaged. It's to do something for mitigation, which is fine. It's great. I think hazard mitigation is needed. But it becomes competitive. And we have to compete with Foley, Robertsdale, Orange Beach, Gulf Shores, Fairhope, Daphne, to get these funds. So as a system, I have to submit an RFP back to this group of stakeholders. They review the projects that everybody has submitted, and then they pick which projects they want to fund or they would see funded. Now, once you do that, you still have to file your project with FEMA, and it has to be approved. I tried doing this and going through the process, and we were wanting to build a safe house for our employees so that we could house them during a storm. So I filled out all of the paperwork, submitted it to FEMA. I didn't hear anything for over a year and a half. I finally get a call back from FEMA and want to know about our safe house project. And I said, well, I didn't think we got the money because we didn't hear anything from it. Oh, no, we just need you to update some paperwork. So they sent me the paperwork with what they need updated. And I update this paperwork and I send it back to them, and I don't hear anything for another year. And then when I hear from them, then they've turned down the project. Now, you've got to keep in mind, too, when things take this long, the cost of what you're trying to do is going up. We had borrowed money from RD to build a safe house several years ago, and the pandemic hit, and then the supply chain issues hit, and the cost of a safe house was $450,000, went to $850,000, and by the time we worked through this process, it was up to $1.4 million.
That's terrible.
So it's just a long, drawn-out process. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to be brief, I just want to be able to recognize Senator Lujan has just come in, but go ahead.
Yes, sir. Real brief. We're an at-cost provider, electric cooperative. Our total utility plant's $140 million. If a Hurricane Michael came through and hit, our service territory, we could lose literally, have a $40 or $50 million expense. FEMA is critically important for us. The only thing I would offer about FEMA is going forward, the regulation surrounding it and the reimbursement, the process of that, just tell us what they are. Don't move the goalposts, keep moving the goalposts, and have that where we can get that process known and understood and therefore applied for quickly.
Thank you very much. Chair recognizes Senator Lujan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Tuberville. It's good to see both of you, and thank you for this important conversation. I'm especially grateful for this discussion after what has been a difficult and devastating fire season and flooding season in New Mexico. Just 2 years after we saw the largest fire in our state's history, a fire, by the way, that was started as a prescribed burn. And some folks didn't see the need to look at it with infrared technology with a burn pile and put a hand to it. And it was cool enough. And community after community was devastated and destroyed. Not because of Mother Nature. Last month, 2 fires that started on the Mescalero Apache Reservation quickly grew out of control. Hotter and drier conditions from climate change, along with high winds, helped the fire spread and burn over 25,000 acres of land in the village of Ruidoso and throughout southern New Mexico. A fire that started one afternoon. By that night, town was being evacuated because it spread so quickly. It was so dry. A few weeks later, we thought Mother Nature was going to help us, and she put down some water and some rain, but it was a little too much because of the burn scars. And what the fire didn't take out, the flood did. Hundreds of homes and buildings have been destroyed by the fires and by the flooding, but the impacts on rural infrastructure don't end there. The fire scar, the monsoons, the flash flooding, the debris flows, septics. In this area, there's not a wastewater system. Families are in septics. Those get filled up. That contaminates everything. It gets into the water lagoons. We're talking about communities up in the mountains. Where our water comes from is if we're blessed with a little bit of snow and it melts and we're able to save it in some lakes and some ponds and we can filter it and we can get it to people to drink. That's how we survive back in New Mexico. All of that gets ruined. The costs can quickly become overwhelming, especially for small rural communities that have fewer resources and less capacity for resilience planning and repairing damaged infrastructure, which I appreciate every one of the panelists today with your testimony. Mr. Chairman, while you may be on the East Coast and Coach, you're down south on the west side, the smallest towns, it's hard. They don't have a revenue base, a tax base sometimes to come up with the cost shares, to figure things out based on population need. And for whatever reason, my ancestors and folks back in New Mexico saw forthright to draw our counties large. Some of the eastern states can fit inside some of our counties in New Mexico. And when that happens, based on the current rules, if we don't hit the population density or the cost threshold, then it's not a national disaster, it's a state disaster. So for all my friends in the Midwest whose size of their counties are the size of ranches in New Mexico, they hit that density pretty quickly. But for western states, New Mexico, Wyoming, you pick one, it's just not fair. It's not fair when we just look at a line that was drawn over a century ago by some folks that got together to throw some lines on a map based on who lived where, or they could see down that way, or there was a mountain here, or there was a creek that divided this place from that place, or it took that many days for you to get on a horseback and ride to 2 towns, so that's where we're going to drop the marker, and that's where we're going to draw the county line. It doesn't apply today with the current rules that we have based on treating all American citizens equally. And I certainly hope that when we look at a rewrite of FEMA, some of the legislation that you've been championing, Mr. Chairman, and our ranking member, Coach, that we even think about FEMA in a regional way across America. Fires in the West are not just fires. It's a day or two or a week or two of fire, and then it's a decade of flooding. Because everything that was holding up that water, it's all gone. And any of you that have ever poured concrete, if you poured it on an incline or decline, and a little bit of water gets on top of it, you see how quick it runs and how it picks up steam? Think about that on a mountain, 13,000 feet, going down to 7,000 feet pretty quickly. You can think about the steam that water picks up, and it picks up trees that have fallen, and it turns them into torpedoes, and they go through people's homes. It's like an explosion when there's a bomb goes off and there's shrapnel that sticks into stuff. The same thing happens with wood into people's homes. It's just devastating. So, Mr. Chairman, I've used up all my time here. You know, community after community, the city of Las Vegas, which is in the heart of that large fire that started with a prescribed burn, their water treatment center. We thought it was going to be okay after that fire a few years ago with all the mitigation. Then some floods came in, destroyed the reservoir again. We're trying to get in there to help them. While that flood hit, 2 other communities, one by the name of Medinales, just north of the city of Espanola, beautiful little community, hardworking families. A little bit of debris came down in the river, even though it wasn't raining on this little town. Pulled down a bunch of water and rock, stopped the river flow. The river picked it up itself, as it sometimes can do, went over a bank and took out a town, took out a community. The devastation wasn't large enough for that county. No federal declaration. But it takes all the feds' approvals to go into the river to take the dirt out. It takes an act of God to get their permission to be able to go do that without a federal declaration. So, Mr. Chairman, I can't thank you enough for having this conversation and bringing attention to what's been happening, not just across Vermont and Alabama and all over America, but in New Mexico. We need to find a way to work together. Democrats and Republicans, we're one big American family here, and I know we can do better to make sure that the smallest communities in America get the same benefits as the biggest cities across the beautiful country that we call home. So thanks for the time. I yield back.
No, thank you for that wonderful statement summarizing the collective commitment we all have, and how, whether we're in a red state or a blue state, we love the citizens we represent. When they get hit, when they get hurt, we want to help. And I've appreciated the support that Vermont's received from many of my Republican colleagues, and I want to reciprocate, and I know, Senator Lujan, you do as well. This is a great hearing. You know, I go back to Senator Tuberville's, Coach Tuberville's comments about trying to have some flexibility in local implementation. It really makes sense. All of our communities, the folks who live there, the biggest thing in their life is their community. And let's take advantage of that. And I think with some of the legislation we have before us, we might be able to get together, hopefully work together to improve the capacity of local people to fix their own disasters with the help of the federal government, but with the local leadership. I really want to thank all the witnesses. This was terrific. I mean, it's the way we should have hearings. And the next step on this would be to propose concrete legislation that incorporates many of the recommendations that all of our witnesses from the great state of Vermont, great state of Minnesota, and the great state of Alabama. You know, it's great to have folks on both sides of the Mason-Dixon line here, speaking truth to the senators. I look forward to continuing to work with all of my colleagues. And I'd like to submit a letter for the record, submitted by the National Association of Counties, without objection, to do that. And the record will remain open for 5 business days for members to submit additional questions or statements. And this hearing, this very good hearing, is now adjourned.